please welcome to the stage my not-quite-wife, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, Jacinda.
Ina mana, ina reo, Ngāti whātua ngā mana whenua o Tamaki Makaurau. E tika te kōrero, e hara taku toa he toa takitahi, he toa takitini. Nō reira tātou e hui hui mai nei, ka hoake tōnu tātou. Thank you everyone for that warm welcome, and thank you Clark. He never ever lets me see anything he writes, and for very good reason. And I want to say to all of you, thank you for being here. What an amazing privilege it is to see you all gathered here today in one place. Thank you to all of you for your work over these last few months, which has made this gathering possible. In a COVID world, our team of 5 million has been a steady ship, and I am so grateful for that. It is hard to believe that we were here in this town hall just 3 years ago, launching our 2017 campaign. Now, if you told me then that our launch in 2020 would be in the midst of a global pandemic with our borders closed, I would have found that very hard to fathom. If you'd told me that Clark and I would by now have a toddler, I wouldn't have believed we would be so lucky. And if you told me that we would have just completed a term in government with both New Zealand First and the Greens, I'd assume you'd been watching excessive amounts of Stranger Things on Netflix. And yet, here we are. It was perhaps fitting then that 3 years ago, as I finished speaking with you at our campaign launch, we all left this space with a joyous song of optimism by Tim Finn playing in the background. It was called Couldn't Be Done. And there were plenty who thought it couldn't. And there were plenty of others who just hoped it couldn't. And while I won't name names, Mike Hosking, I will say this. When we stood here 3 years ago, it wasn't about winning for the sake of winning. It wasn't about being better than anyone else. It wasn't about proving people wrong. It was about change. It was about change because after 9 years, there was a realization that there were some important things that had been neglected, and that doing things differently wasn't only possible, it was necessary. Now, John Key and Bill English, they were good managers of our economy, and I do want to thank them for that. They helped New Zealand through the GFC, and they paid down debt. But after 9 years of a singular focus on GDP in surplus, the actual result was that too many families were sleeping in cars, too many New Zealanders were suffering from poor mental health, and too many of our waterways were polluted. Now, I maintain the point I have often made through this term. Economic growth accompanied by worsening social outcomes is not success at all. It is failure. And so, on the 26th of October 2017, as our government was sworn in, we set out to change that. I remember the day of our swearing in really well. It started with a text from my mother. She was in London with my sister who was expecting a baby. and that morning my nephew arrived. As John Campbell said, it was a big day in the Ardern household. I did an interview with John that day as I drove to Government House to be sworn in as Prime Minister. Now, I've never listened back to that interview until yesterday. Now, two things stood out to me. The first was that every time John asked me how far we were in our journey, rather than opt for naming street names, I used well-known landmarks, namely Subway and KFC. And secondly, it struck me that my belief in what we needed to do as a government and why had not changed. When John Campbell asked, "What is it you want to do?" I replied, "I want this government to feel different. I want it to feel like we are truly focused on everybody. I want people to feel that it's open and that it's listening and that it's going to bring kindness back in everything we do." I know that will sound curious, but to me, if people can see that they have an empathetic government, I think they'll truly understand that when we're making hard calls, that we're doing it with the right goal and the right focus in mind. That's the feeling I want this government to create. We have made big decisions. We have made hard decisions, but ultimately, we have made progress. Now, I'm very conscious that if I run through every single one of the things that we've done, I risk losing my audience. And that's saying something when half of your audience are enthusiastically holding up Labour signs. So let's just run through the things that we stood here 3 years ago and said we wanted to change. We said we wanted to build a country where children grow up free from poverty. And so in our first 100 days, we brought in the Families Package. It boosted the incomes of some 384,000 families. It included the Best Start payment, the first time New Zealand had a universal payment for kids since the 1990s. We introduced the winter energy payment, with over 1 million New Zealanders no longer having to make the decision between a warm home and food on the table. We indexed benefits to wages and lifted them by $25 a week. We increased school funding so parents don't have to pay school donations. We scrapped NCEA fees and are rolling out lunches in schools and period products as well. We extended paid parental leave to $26 a week, 26 weeks, and we increased the minimum wage to $18.90, which means an extra $126 a week for a full-time worker. But for all of this, there is still more to do. We said that shelter was a basic right and that we wanted everyone to have a warm, dry home. And so we created the Healthy Home Guarantee, invested $500 million to start retrofitting state houses, stopped foreign buyers purchasing residential housing, and gave tenants more security. We brought more affordable housing to the market through KiwiBuild. We launched the start of progressive home ownership schemes and a Papakainga housing scheme. We expanded the Housing First program and created 3,900 public housing places. In fact, we have undertaken the largest house building program of any government since the 1970s, with 18,000 state houses to be delivered by 2024. And yet still, there is more to do. We said we wanted to rebuild health and education, and so we made visits to the doctor cheaper for over 500,000 Kiwis. We increased nurses in schools. We employed more doctors, nurses and midwives and mental health workers. And we began rebuilding our rundown hospitals and health facilities. We increased Pharmac funding by over $400 million to buy more medicines for New Zealanders, including new cancer drugs. We set up the Cancer Control Agency and funded new radiation machines. And we made the biggest investment in mental health ever seen in New Zealand with new free frontline services. And yet still, there is more to do. We said we wanted to make our rivers swimmable again. And so we worked with farmers and environmental groups on freshwater reforms and invested in riparian planting, fencing of waterways and sediment control. We said climate change was my generation's nuclear-free moment, and so we stopped new offshore oil and gas exploration. We passed the Zero Carbon Act, we established the Climate Commission, we invested in our goal of 100% renewable electricity generation and reached an historic deal with farmers to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture. And still, there is more to do. We trained more te reo teachers in schools, invested in kohanga reo and whānau ora, and are making sure New Zealand's history is taught in our schools. We ran budget surpluses, reduced net debt to below 20% of GDP, and got unemployment to the lowest rates in over a decade, but still, there is more to do. Now, we haven't always achieved everything that we set out to, and there have been lessons for us in that. In that same interview 3 years ago, I was asked what I thought people wanted from our time in government. I said, I think we've got a big job to do to try and restore faith in politics and politicians. And I know politicians are desperate for that too. I think it's about really just following through. And when we fail, when we haven't been able to reach our goal, telling people why. That's what people expect of us. Now, despite the many things we have done, we haven't always reached every goal. We wanted more homes for first home buyers. We wanted light rail in Auckland. But we've had to accept that sometimes when you try things that have never been done before, you won't always succeed. But that doesn't mean you should give up. There have been other lessons too. Some were unexpected. Some were devastating. I remember vividly the moment I received a phone call telling me that there had been a shooting in Christchurch on March 15 last year. I was in a van driving to visit a new environment school in New Plymouth. And much has been said about that afternoon, the terror that was rained down on our Muslim community and what it represented for us as a nation. It will forever be etched into our collective memories. But so too will the response. Now, whether it was March 15 or Whakaari White Island or even COVID-19, these three entirely different events that devastated in very different ways, they drew out a response from Kiwis that was the same. They drew out a sense of collective purpose, of determination, of kindness. They are all values we will need as we take on our next challenge, and our next challenge is huge. Some have asked me whether this is the COVID election. And no one wants it to be, We would all prefer the world to be free of the health and economic impacts that this global pandemic has created. I would rather not have had to close our borders or put in place the most severe restrictions on personal freedoms in our country's history. But it has been our new reality, and one that the team of 5 million have made work in the most extraordinary way. We have now one of the most open economies in the world, and we have a head start on our recovery and rebuild. But our job is not done. And so yes, there is no denying that COVID has changed New Zealand, and therefore it will inevitably change what we talk about this election. And there is a lot to talk about. There wasn't a playbook for COVID-19. That means there was no pre-written plan for how a country should respond to a 1 in 100 year global pandemic, but respond we did. We went hard and we went early. We used the wage subsidy to support 1.7 million workers through a lockdown and beyond. We put ourselves in the position to safely reopen our economy. We have never wavered from the view that the best economic response was a strong health response. Now, there are tough times ahead, but the proof is in an economy up and running well before others. And now that we're here, we need to keep rolling out our 5-point plan to recover and rebuild. Here's what that entails for the next 3 years if we are re-elected. Firstly, we're investing in people with extra income support and opportunities to retrain through free apprenticeships and vocational training. We're creating good, decent jobs through shovel-ready infrastructure projects like community pools and sports facilities, and investment in environmental projects that are a win-win for our people and our planet. We're making sure our investments are taking on our long-term challenges by building more state houses, waste processing facilities, and energy options that mean New Zealand can be powered by 100% renewable electricity and all of the exciting opportunities that that brings. We're supporting small business with interest-free loans, R&D support, targeted tourism funding and tax refunds. And we are retraining our place as a trading nation, providing practical support for our exporters while also working hard to improve their access into new markets. It is a plan that is already in motion and that is already making a difference, and that, with New Zealanders' support, we want to keep delivering over the next 3 years. While we know there is much ahead of us, this week's unemployment rate of 4% shows the measures we have taken to date have cushioned the economic blow from COVID. And the investments we are making now are all designed to keep driving job growth. But the support for those hardest hit won't just be measured in statistics. Now, I have a different metric, you've heard it before. It's called letters. As COVID hit, one of the things we did to support our people's well-being was to extend our free lunches in schools program. I got a letter from a child in one of the schools we've already rolled this initiative out to recently. She wrote, "I had a mate who never ate, and whenever I said, 'Are you hungry?' she would always say, 'Nah, I'm not hungry,' but I knew she was. She was too ashamed to admit it. But then you started getting us free lunches, and now she can eat, and she is healthy. I'm really happy now because I don't have to worry about my friend. COVID has undoubtedly created many friends for us to worry about, and we know there are tough times ahead. Analysis by the Treasury shows that our downturn's impact on our lowest paid and most insecure workers, they will be the ones hurt the most. And we also know that those without formal qualification, those over 50, disabled people, Māori and Pacifica workers will disproportionately bear the brunt of economic downturns. They are often in industries where job losses are most common and are the last industries to recover. Some call it economic scarring, the long-lasting damage to individuals of an economic downturn. I call it the loss of potential and the greatest of wastes, and I am determined it will not happen on Labour's watch. That's why I am announcing today that if Labour is returned to government, we will roll out a support package to assist businesses in employing up to 40,000 New Zealanders whose employment is impacted by COVID-19. We are revamping and expanding our existing flexi wage scheme, a wage subsidy, to help employers hire those on a benefit who are at risk of long-term unemployment. Under our proposal, we will double the value of the wage subsidy to an average of $7,500 and ensure that far more working income clients, including those who may be on the COVID income support payment, are eligible for this scheme. As part of this package, I'm also announcing we will be ring-fencing $30 million to provide grants to those who lose their job to start a new business of their own. The intention is to support those New Zealanders most affected by the economic hit of the virus. Now, our Team of 5 Million's approach to fighting COVID means that there is a huge willingness in our business community to avoid unemployment rising by taking on new staff where they can. But many just need a little bit of extra support, which this package provides. Businesses large and small, they are crucial to our economic recovery, but they can't do it alone. The flexi wage is a way for the government to partner with the private sector to support job creation. It will act as a strong incentive to support those who are being hardest hit and provide additional support to businesses who might not otherwise be in a position to take someone on long term. And importantly, we know this is a program we can scale up quickly that works. An evaluation by MSD of the flexi wage scheme showed 70% of people placed into work still had a job at the end of the evaluation period. And that $7 in value was generated by every single dollar that was invested. I want to be clear though, this is a targeted scheme. It is aimed at supporting real jobs that have a real chance of lasting. It's an investment in our people, their future, and it's about working together. Now, almost every day I talk to businesses large and small. I know their contribution to the economy, the commitment they have to their staff. I understand the huge pressures they're facing, and government alone can't do everything. Neither can business, but together we can. But as with all investments, there is a price tag. This scheme represents an investment of $311 million. Now, our cautious approach to future spending means we will be using the current underspend from the wage subsidy to pay for this program, rather than drawing from the COVID response fund, which we intend to preserve just in case we need to fight the virus again, or to reduce our level of debt. Ultimately, though, there is no costless response to COVID. But Grant Robertson's excellent management of the books mean we went into COVID with lower debt relative to GDP than almost any other nation. And we look to come out in a better position than Australia, the UK, Canada and the US. Keeping debt low is important to us, and we have shown that. But that need not be at the expense of health and education, and it shouldn't mean leaving people behind. In this election, you'll see that that is the difference between Labor and others. And so, when people ask, is this a COVID election? My answer is yes, it is. But that does not mean that there aren't still choices to be made. It does not mean there aren't ideas to be debated, policies to be released, manifestos to be discussed. In fact, it's the very reason why this election is more important than ever. It's about the future. It's about leadership. And it's about values. It's about whether we stop and change to another team or whether we keep those we know and we trust. It's about whether we build about whether we build a few roads or whether we rebuild New Zealand. It's about whether we stop and start again or whether we keep up the momentum we already have. In the last 3 years, the Labor government has dealt with a lot, and we have learned a lot too. We came in on a platform of change and a commitment to tackle our long-term challenges, and that is what we have done. Fewer children live in poverty. More homes are being built. We're closer to making our country clean, green and carbon neutral. And when we had to make hard decisions, we have been strong, we have been empathetic and we have been kind. But there is much more to do. Now, more than ever, is the time to keep going, to keep working, to do more for our people and their well-being, for our small businesses, for our economy and for our recovery, to grab hold of the opportunities that lie in front of us. So let's keep going, let's keep rebuilding, and let's keep moving.